I have been doing this job for 31 cycles. 31 cycles of sitting in glass observation towers, while species who could crush moons with their bare hands argued over trade lanes and territorial breathing room. 31 cycles of writing down what I saw, translating it into the dry, bloodless language the confluence demanded, and filing it into a system that probably nobody read until something went catastrophically wrong. I have watched the Krethvor execute a rival ambassador in the middle of a peace summit, and still managed to keep my voice steady enough to narrate the whole thing into my recorder. I have watched the Shaldreen, who are 7 meters tall and have 17 eyes arranged around their skull like a crown of seeing, weep in their particular fashion, a high-pitched resonance that makes your internal organs vibrate uncomfortably, when their homeworld's coordinates were formally recognized by galactic convention. I have seen things that would rearrange your understanding of what the universe considers normal. But I have never, in 31 cycles, seen what I saw on the day the human battleship arrived. And I need to be honest about something before I go any further into this account. I need to say it plainly, without the polished confluence language I usually hide behind. I was afraid. Not of the humans, not at first. I was afraid of what the Drakthul were going to do to them. Let me tell you about the Drakthul. You have to understand them before any of this makes sense, before the arrival means anything, before the silence that followed means anything. The Drakthul are, by every measurable metric the galactic confluence has ever devised, the most formidable warrior species in the known galaxy, not the second most, not tied for first, alone, by a margin so large that the species holding second place, the Vreth Collective, and they are no small thing, openly acknowledge it in their own official documents. They are approximately 3.5 meters tall in their standard combat configuration, though they can expand certain structural nodes in their skeletal framework to push that closer to 4 meters if the situation demands psychological intimidation. Their skin is a deep, mineral black, not the black of absence, but the black of something that has absorbed every wavelength of light that has ever touched it and kept it, stored it. Like they collect the very light of the universe and refuse to give it back. Their eyes are amber, not gently amber, not warmly amber. Amber the way a dying star is amber, with heat underneath it and violence implicit in the glow. They move without sound. A fully armored Drakthul, and they are almost always fully armored, does not produce the mechanical clanking you would expect from a 200-kilogram warrior encased in their ablative combat plating. They produce nothing. They flow, like something that was never taught that moving through space ought to make noise. Their warships are black too, same mineral black as their skin, same light-absorbing quality, and the reason for that is not aesthetic. It is functional. Their hulls are coated in a compound the confluence has no independent name for. We simply call it Drakthul null skin in our technical documents. That absorbs 73% of all directed energy weapon fire. Blasters, plasma cannons, focused particle beams, all of it, and most of the kinetic energy from mass drivers too. They do not have shields in the way most species understand shields, a projected barrier that exists separately from the ship. Their defense is their skin. It is built into them. You cannot remove it without removing them. In 31 cycles of galactic diplomacy, the Drakthul fleet has been engaged in direct combat 17 times. They have won all 17. The most recent engagement was 6 cycles ago, against a combined fleet assembled by 4 separate species who had pooled their resources specifically, because none of them could face the Drakthul alone. The combined fleet had 212 warships. The Drakthul committed 47. The engagement lasted 11 hours. All 212 ships of the combined fleet were destroyed or driven off. The Drakthul lost 3 vessels and, according to their own casualty report, which they submitted to the confluence with what I can only describe as casual contempt, 11 warriors. 11. against 212 ships. So when I tell you that on cycle 7441, when a lone human battleship dropped out of faster-than-light travel approximately 40,000 kilometers from the Drakthul forward fleet position, and I watched on the observation monitors as the Drakthul battle cruisers moved to intercept it. When I tell you that I gripped the edge of my console and felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the station's environmental controls, I need you to understand the mathematics of what I was looking at. One ship against the fleet that had never lost. I should explain how we got to that moment. The context matters. The Orion Confluence Neutral Zone, Sector 9 Ravine, is not a glamorous posting. It is a stretch of space that exists primarily because three major galactic powers, the Drakthul Sovereignty, the Vreth Collective, and the Shaldrine Communion, could not agree on who owned it, so they collectively agreed that nobody owned it. The confluence maintains a station here, a large one, Orion Station, which functions as a trading hub, a diplomatic waypoint, and in situations like the one developing that cycle, a front row seat to events that could restructure the balance of galactic power. The Drakthul had been in the neutral zone for 3 weeks standard, which in galactic diplomatic terms means they were making a point. You do not park your war fleet in a neutral zone by accident. You park it there because you want someone to understand something about your intentions without having to actually say the words. The point, as near as our diplomatic analysis section had determined, was the humans. Humanity had been making noise in the outer sectors for roughly 4 standard cycles. Not the kind of noise a new species usually makes, the tentative, apologetic, please don't shoot us kind of noise that characterized most first contacts. Humanity made a different kind of noise. They built ships fast. Not the fastest ships the galaxy had ever seen. The Vreth Collective holds that title, but structurally unusual ships. Dense. Heavy in a way that seemed inefficient by standard galactic engineering metrics. Armored in layered composite systems that our sensors could not fully penetrate. And they expanded steadily without asking. Not aggressively, not exactly. They did not fire on existing confluence members. They did not make explicit territorial claims that violated established boundaries, but they moved through space with a quality of assurance that older species found deeply, viscerally unsettling. Like a species that had been somewhere quiet, working on something, and had decided that the time for being quiet was now over. The confluence had been in preliminary contact talks with human representatives for 18 months standard. Polite, careful, diplomatic talks. The humans sent representatives who were calm and articulate and brought documents and clearly understood the protocols, which impressed people more than they admitted. But 3 weeks ago, something changed. A Drakthul patrol vessel had moved through what it considered its own territorial extension, the boundaries of which were, technically, disputed, and encountered a human mining operation. Not a military installation, a mining operation. Human workers, human extraction equipment, human transport vessels. The Drakthul patrol had communicated what it wanted in the way the Drakthul communicate things, by positioning their weapons to fire and expecting the other party to draw the obvious conclusion. The human mining operation did not leave. The foreman, I read the transcript later. It is one of the most remarkable documents in my professional archive, transmitted back a single message. It was polite. It acknowledged the patrol's presence. It noted that the mining operation was functioning within coordinates the Human-Terran Union considered its own established zone of operation. And it stated, with what I can only describe as extraordinary mildness, that if the patrol had documentation suggesting otherwise, the foreman would be happy to review it, but that until such documentation was provided, the mining operation would continue. The Drakthul patrol could not process this. It is not that the Drakthul are unintelligent. They are formidably intelligent, in the way that anything which has survived and dominated for as long as they have must be, but they have a particular relationship with defiance. Species simply do not defy them. It does not happen. There is a reason it does not happen, which is that the last several species that did it no longer exist as recognizable civilizations. So the concept of a mining foreman, not even a military commander, a mining foreman reviewing the situation and deciding to keep drilling, was not something the Drakthul Patrol was operationally prepared for. They withdrew to report to their command. And their command, apparently deciding that this required a demonstration of a particular kind of clarity, moved the war fleet into the neutral zone. To wait for the humans to send someone to discuss the situation. I had been on the station for 3 weeks watching this develop. Our diplomatic team had been frantically messaging both sides. The humans had responded thoughtfully. The Drakthul had responded with the exact kind of silence that means your message was received, considered, and found insufficient. Then on cycle 7441, at approximately 3:40 Station Standard Time, our long-range sensors registered a faster-than-light emergent signature. One ship. I was in the observation bay when it happened. The senior staff had been sleeping in rotation. We had been running extended monitoring shifts, and everyone was tired in that specific deep space posting way that settles into your bones and makes everything feel slightly unreal. I had taken the 200 to 600 shift because I had stopped being able to sleep properly about a week into watching that Drakthul fleet sit there like a dark fist held just barely open. Coordinator Usalin was with me. She is Vreth Collective, second-generation station staff, extraordinarily competent and not given to dramatic reactions. When I want to know whether something is actually alarming or just seems alarming because of my own limited perspective, I watch Usalin's face. The emergent signature registered on the console display with the soft chime our systems use for any incoming vessel. Standard protocol. Nothing alarming about a chime. But I had been watching that sector for 3 weeks, and nothing had come through it. So I looked at the display immediately, and I felt something that I later identified as a preemptive kind of dread. The feeling of knowing something matters before you know what it is. Usalin. I see it. She was already at the secondary console, pulling up the approach vector. The ship had emerged 40,000 kilometers from the Drakthul forward position, close enough that there was no possible way it was not intentional. You do not miscalculate a faster-than-light emergence by 40,000 kilometers. The margins on FTL travel are not that large. That ship went precisely where it meant to go. Can we get a visual? The long-range optical systems on Orion Station are among the best in this sector, one of the few genuine advantages of the posting. They take a moment to resolve through the electromagnetic noise of recent FTL emergence, but they resolve. What came up on my screen made me stop breathing for a moment. I have seen human ships in documentation, technical readouts, engineering assessments, the confluence observer reports from the outer sector contacts. I thought I knew what to expect. Dense, somewhat inelegant by galactic aesthetic standards, layered armor, utilitarian construction. The UES Dominion was not any of those things. Or rather, it was all of those things, and it was also something else entirely. Something the technical reports had not prepared me for, because technical reports measure dimensions and weapon counts and shield ratings, and they do not measure the quality of presence that a thing has when it arrives. The Dominion was massive. Not quite in the class of a Drakthul battlecruiser, nothing the humans had built yet was, but larger than I had anticipated from the documented specifications. Perhaps 1,100 meters in length, but the length was not the thing that hit you first. The thing that hit you first was that it looked like it had been built to absorb punishment indefinitely and keep moving. Every Drakthul ship has an elegance to its lethality, a sculptural quality. They are beautiful in the way that a predator is beautiful, everything designed, everything purposeful, everything communicating a single message about what the ship exists to do. Human warships, I had read, were utilitarian. The Dominion was not utilitarian, it was something else. It was layered. That is the only word I have for it. The hull was not smooth. It was built in overlapping sections, each one thick enough to function independently, and between those sections you could see, even at this distance, the recessed lines of weapon systems. Not exposed, recessed, protected, like a species that had learned a long time ago that you do not leave your weapons where the other person can target them. The forward section was blunt. Not aerodynamically blunt, not accidentally blunt. Deliberately, geometrically blunt, in a way that communicated something about how the ship was designed to approach an engagement, not to avoid the collision, to survive it. Around the forward section, I could see what our documents described as the Dominion-class primary gun batteries. 6 of them on the dorsal surface, 6 on the ventral, all recessed, all pointing forward in a convergent firing arc. The secondary batteries were visible along the flanks, smaller, faster cycling, built for point defense and close engagement. And running down the entire spine of the ship from bow to stern was a rail system. I recognized it from the engineering documents, a magnetic acceleration track for kinetic delivery systems. Not a single weapon. A system, a mechanism that used the entire length of the ship as the barrel. "What class is that?" Usselin asked. "Dominion-class battleship. Human designation UES Dominion. Hull number." I checked the transponder signal that was broadcasting steadily, openly, making no effort to hide its identity. "Hull number 1, first of class." Usselin looked at the visual for a long moment. Then she looked at the Dracthal fleet position. "They came alone," she said. "Yes." "One ship." "Yes." She did not say anything else for a moment. Neither did I on the display. The Dominion's transponder was still broadcasting. Clear signal. Open frequency. "Hello, we're here. Here is exactly who we are." The Dracthal fleet had detected it, of course. Their sensors make ours look like someone lit a candle in a dark room. They detected it the moment it emerged. Nothing happened. No, that is not accurate. I should be precise, because precision is what this record demands. Something did happen. The Dracthal fleet, which had been in the standard neutral zone holding pattern, steady, slow movement, the galactic equivalent of a fleet standing still, stopped. The movement stopped. The entire fleet simply paused. And that was the first moment I thought, they were not expecting this. Let me tell you what not expecting this means when we're talking about the Dracthal. Because you have to understand, the Dracthal have a specific expectation for how moments like this proceed. The expectation is rooted in experience, 30 cycles of it, 100 cycles before that, a history of military encounters that goes back before the confluence even existed. When the Dracthal fleet parks in a neutral zone and waits, what comes is an envoy, a diplomatic vessel, something small, something clearly non-threatening, something that signals by its very configuration that the species sending it understands the nature of the conversation. Nobody sends a battleship to a diplomatic impasse with the Dracthal. Nobody. Not because it is against protocol, though it is. Not because the confluence conventions on neutral zone conduct strongly discourage it, though they do. But because sending a battleship to face the Dracthal fleet is the act of either someone who does not understand what the Dracthal are, or someone who understands perfectly well and has decided it does not matter. Neither option had ever previously applied to any species the Dracthal had encountered. There had always been understanding, and with understanding had always come the appropriate deference. And now this. One ship, broadcasting its identity openly, making no attempt to appear as anything other than what it was. A warship. The first of its class, which meant it was also the best of its class, the proof of concept, the standard against which all subsequent vessels in its line would be measured. Sitting 40,000 kilometers from the most feared fleet in the known galaxy. Not moving. Not powering weapons. Our sensors could detect the energy signatures of weapons systems being charged, and the Dominion's weapons were cold. Not active. Not even in standby configuration. Just there. Waiting. Usselin had called it in to the night duty commander by then, and within 15 minutes the observation bay was full. Station Commander Prethyavel, who is a Shaldrine and 7 meters of genuine professional composure, had arranged his considerable body into the primary observation position, and was watching the displays with an expression I had learned over 2 years to read as serious concern. "Has there been communication from the human vessel?" he asked. "Transponder broadcasting continuously," I told him. "Standard identification signal. No additional communication on any monitored frequency." "From the Draxul?" "Nothing." He absorbed this. The observation bay had that particular quality of noise that comes when a lot of people are carefully not making sound. The breathing, the small movements, the absence of conversation that in itself becomes a kind of presence. On the display, both fleets sat there. The Draxul, 31 warships, including their flagship, the Eternal Sovereignty, which is the largest vessel I have personally observed in 31 cycles of galactic service, and 1 human battleship. Not moving. Not communicating. Just watching each other across 40,000 kilometers of very cold, very empty space. The waiting lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. I know this precisely because I was watching the station chronometer with the specific focus of someone who has nothing to do except pay attention and cannot stop paying attention. 4 hours and 17 minutes of 2 fleets looking at each other. The Dominion did not move. The Draxul fleet did not move. No communication from either party on any public or monitored frequency. Our diplomatic team had sent 3 messages to the Dominion during that period. Routine, carefully worded, requesting acknowledgement of presence and intention. The Dominion had responded to all 3. Brief, formal, professional acknowledgments. Yes, we are here. Yes, we are aware of the situation. No, we do not require assistance at this time. No, we do not require assistance. I read that third response 3 times. At the 2-hour mark, something changed on the Draxul side. It was subtle, the kind of subtle you only catch if you have been watching very carefully for a very long time, but it was there. 2 of the Draxul forward picket vessels altered their relative positions. Not an aggressive maneuver, not an obvious preparation for engagement. A repositioning. A rearrangement that changed their formation from the standard neutral zone holding pattern to something that our tactical analysis database flagged as a pre-engagement assessment configuration. It was the Draxul equivalent of leaning forward. They were looking at the Dominion more carefully. What are they reading on their sensors? Coordinator Usselin asked no one in particular. Everything, said our station's technical analysis officer, a young Vreth collective named Sorrows who had been brought in specifically because of his background in military sensor systems. They are running full active scans. They've been running them since the ship arrived. And Sorrows looked uncomfortable in a way I recognized as someone about to say something they were uncertain whether they should say. The ship is not matching our documentation on human vessel capabilities. In what direction? He pulled up a display, hull density primarily. The armor composites are reading at approximately 40% greater density than our documented specifications for comparable human warship classes. And the weapon energy signatures. He paused. When a weapon system is cold, completely powered down, there are still residual energy signatures from the cells, the capacitor arrays, the fire control systems. Ghost signatures. We can get a sense of the weapon's potential output from the ghost signature even when the weapon isn't active. I know how sensor analysis works, Usselin said, with gentle impatience. Yes, right. The ghost signatures on the Dominion's primary batteries are approximately. He checked his display again as if hoping the numbers had changed. Approximately 260% above what our documents suggested for comparable systems. Silence in the observation bay. 260%, Commander Prethyavel said. Yes, Commander. That would make those weapons comparable to Dracthal tertiary batteries, yes, at minimum. Nobody said anything for a moment. The Dracthal, I thought, were reading the same numbers, and the Dracthal, sitting there in their pre-engagement assessment configuration, were doing the same calculation we were doing. One human ship with primary batteries comparable to Dracthal tertiary systems. 6 primary batteries dorsally, 6 ventrally, plus the secondary arrays, plus whatever that spine-mounted rail system was capable of delivering. Against a fleet of 31 ships. The mathematics were still impossible, even if every weapon on the Dominion was significantly more powerful than our documentation suggested, even if the armor was as dense as the scans implied. 31 ships against 1 was 31 ships against 1. There was no math in the known galaxy that made those odds favorable for the single vessel. But the Dracthal had engaged 200-plus ship fleets before. They had not engaged something they could not fully read, something that was not performing as expected, something that had arrived alone, with weapons cold, and had simply sat there for 4 hours without flinching, without maneuvering, without any of the behavioral signals that indicated a vessel preparing to fight or preparing to flee. At hour 3, I caught something on the Dracthal communication band. Not content, their communications are heavily encrypted and we cannot decode them in real time, but volume. The number of internal transmissions within the Dracthal fleet suddenly increased substantially around the 3-hour mark. I showed it to Sorrows. He looked at it for a long time. That's a command consultation cycle, he said finally. That's what it looks like when a Dracthal commander polls subordinate commanders for tactical assessment. They're asking each other what they think, I said. Yes. I sat with that for a moment, 31 cycles of watching the Dracthal. I had never, in 31 cycles, seen documentation of a Dracthal commander conducting a consultation cycle before engaging a single vessel. They consulted before major fleet engagements, multi-front operations, situations with complex strategic variables. Not before destroying one ship. They're not sure, Usselin said quietly from my left. I looked at her. What? They're not sure, she said again. About the ship, they're not sure. At 4 hours and 17 minutes, the Dominion moved. Not toward the Dracthal fleet, not away from it. It moved laterally, a slow, deliberate repositioning that brought it from its emergence point to a position that was, I checked this 3 times, exactly equidistant from the Dracthal forward line and the edge of the neutral zone boundary. The mathematical center of the space between them. Then it stopped. And then, for the first time in 4 hours and 17 minutes, the Dominion transmitted, not on the identification frequency, on the diplomatic channel, the common confluence diplomatic band that everyone in this sector monitors. Commander Prethyavel straightened his considerable frame, put it on primary audio. The voice that came through was human, male I believed, though I was still learning to read human gender markers in speech. Calm. Not the forced calm of someone suppressing anxiety. I have spent 31 cycles learning the difference, but the natural calm of someone who had made all their decisions some time ago and was now simply executing them. Dracthal Sovereignty Fleet. This is Captain Aldous Reeve, Commanding Officer of the United Earth Ship Dominion *, Battle Group Omega, Terran Union Navy. I understand your fleet has been waiting in this zone for some time regarding the situation in the outer mining sectors. I'm here to have that conversation. I'm transmitting my formal diplomatic credentials now. I'm available at your convenience. A pause. I'll wait. The transmission ended. The observation bay was utterly silent. At your convenience, someone said quietly. I think it was one of the junior analysts from the night shift who had stayed past their rotation end. I'll wait, he said, I'll wait. I understood why that landed the way it did. In 31 cycles, I have observed diplomatic contact between many species and the Drakthul. The universal pattern, not because it is required by any confluence protocol, but because it is the natural consequence of understanding what the Drakthul are, is deference in tone, careful language, nothing that could be construed as setting terms or establishing position from a place of equality. Captain Reeve had said, I'm available at your convenience, as if his convenience was comparable to theirs. As if the question of who would wait and who would speak first was a mutual negotiation, rather than an obvious function of the power differential in the room. I'll wait. Not, I await your response. Not, I defer to your timeline. I'll wait. The casual contraction, the personal subject, as if he were a colleague who had arrived early for a meeting and was perfectly comfortable getting himself a cup of something and reading until the other party showed up. Sorrows was staring at the communication board. He's not scared, he said. It came out sounding like a diagnosis rather than an observation. He's one man on one ship, I said. He has to be. Sorrows shook his head slowly. No, that's not when you're performing comm because you're afraid there are markers. Micro variations in voice frequency, pacing irregularities, the way the syntax tightens when someone is managing something. I studied communication analysis at the academy for 6 years. That man, he shook his head again. He might actually just be calm. I looked at the display. The Dominion, sitting in the mathematical center of the space between itself and the Drakthul fleet, not moving, not powering weapons, not as far as our sensors could tell, doing anything except exactly what its captain had said it would do. Waiting. The Drakthul took 23 minutes to respond. 23 minutes is, in Drakthul diplomatic terms, essentially instantaneous. The Confluence Convention for Formal Communication Timelines assumes a minimum 48-hour response window for major diplomatic contacts. 23 minutes was not following any conventional timeline. 23 minutes meant something. The Drakthul communication came on the same diplomatic channel, which was itself unusual. The Drakthul typically demanded that communication occur on their own encrypted military band, which requires the other party to adopt their technology standard and implicitly positions the Drakthul as controlling the communication medium. They responded on the common channel, the human captain's channel. The Drakthul Sovereignty Fleet Commander was named Vrethdahl. I had a file on him. Everyone monitoring this sector had a file on him. He was one of the most decorated active commanders in Drakthul military history, which is saying something extraordinary given what that history contains. He had commanded the 47-ship engagement 6 cycles ago against the combined 212-ship fleet. He was, by any objective measurement, one of the most dangerous beings in this sector of the galaxy. His voice, translated through the common diplomatic channel's universal rendering system, was deep and structured in a way that felt almost architectural, like language that had been built to last. The Drakthul don't quite speak the way other species do. There is a resonance in it, a physical component, and even the translated version carries a quality that makes you feel it slightly before you understand it. Terran Captain, you arrive alone. Not a question, an observation. An observation delivered in a tone that contained, I thought, something I had not expected to hear from Vrethdahl. Curiosity. Captain Reeves' response came 18 seconds later. 18 seconds is, for a human, approximately the time required to take a breath and decide how to say something. Yes. Just that one word. Another pause. 32 cycles ago, the Shelani Conquered sent 40 warships to negotiate with us. Your species sends one. The Shelani Conquered was negotiating, Captain Reeves said. I'm here for a conversation. Different requirements. You believe one ship is sufficient for a conversation with the Sovereignty Fleet. I believe, Reeves said, that the number of ships I bring tells you something about how I think the conversation needs to go. I didn't come here to impress you with numbers. I came to talk, so I brought a ship, not a statement. Silence on the channel. Then, your vessel is not what our records indicate human warship technology can produce. No, Reeve agreed, it's not. Silence. How long have humans had this capability? A while, Reeve said. The observation bay was absolutely frozen. I am not being metaphorical. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Whatever was happening in that 40,000-kilometer gap between two vessels was something that none of us had training for, had reference experience for, had any framework to place. A while, Vrethdal repeated. We had some time to work on things. You know how it is, you're a new species. You need to figure out where you stand. You spend a few generations working that out quietly before you go looking for company. Another silence, longer this time. We are going to have this conversation face to face, Vrethdal said, not a request. I was hoping you'd say that, Captain Reeves said. I'll have coordinates for a shuttle bay cleared for your transport. Is 1 hour standard time sufficient? The implication sat there in the silence that followed like a stone someone had dropped into still water. The human captain had just offered shuttle bay coordinates. His shuttle bay. He was inviting a Drakthul Supreme Fleet commander onto his ship. Not going to the Drakthul, not requesting neutral ground, inviting them. 1 hour is sufficient, Vrethdal said. The channel closed. The observation bay stayed frozen for another 3 seconds. Then Commander Prethyavel exhaled, a long, controlled Shaldrine exhalation that serves the same psychological function as a human swearing, and said, very quietly, someone document everything that just happened. I was already typing. In the 40 minutes that followed, the Dominion sent 3 additional transmissions to Orion Station. The first was a formal notification to the station's diplomatic office that a direct bilateral meeting between Captain Reeve and Drakthul Fleet Commander Vrethdal was occurring aboard the human vessel, and that the station's observer presence was welcomed if desired. This was entirely within Confluence Convention for bilateral diplomatic meetings in the neutral zone. The second was a technical communication to our logistics office, requesting that the station flag any known dietary or environmental requirements for Drakthul visitors to shipboard environments. This was delivered with the same matter-of-fact professionalism as a shipping manifest, and the person in our logistics office who received it spent approximately 5 minutes staring at it before forwarding it to Commander Prethyavel's attention. The third communication was addressed to me personally, in my capacity as senior observer. It read, Observer Veth Kalos, Captain Reeve extends a formal invitation for you to be present aboard the UES Dominion during the bilateral meeting. Your presence as Confluence observer would be valued. Shuttle transport available upon request. I read it twice, then I looked at Usalin. Go, she said, before I could say anything. I'm mid-shift. Veth Kalos. She gave me a look that I have known for 2 years and which means, do not be an idiot about something that is clearly not the time for idiotic decisions. Go. I went. The shuttle ride from Orion Station to the Dominion takes approximately 12 minutes at standard approach velocity. I have taken thousands of shuttle flights in 31 cycles. I have never spent those 12 minutes the way I spent those 12 minutes. I watched the Dominion resolve from a display image into a real thing as we approached, and I kept thinking about the word layers. That was still the word. Up close, the hull was even more so. You could see the texture of it, the way the composite plating overlapped like scales on a creature that expected to be struck repeatedly, and had evolved to absorb those strikes and keep moving. The ports between plating sections housed the recessed weapons systems, and from this angle I could see that the recesses were deep. The weapons were protected by several meters of composite material on all accessible sides. You would have to dig through the hull to reach them. The coloring was not black, as I had thought from the station displays. It was a very deep gray, gunship gray, I later learned humans called it, and it did not absorb light so much as it simply refused to be showy about reflecting it. A quiet color, a utilitarian one. The spine rail system was more impressive up close. It ran from approximately 100 meters behind the bow to perhaps 200 meters from the stern, and at this proximity, you could see the acceleration coils along its length, each one the size of a small transport vessel, precisely spaced, mathematically perfect in their arrangement. The rail was also recessed, protected from above and below by hull extensions that formed a kind of channel. You could not easily target the rail without first penetrating those hull extensions. The ship did not look like a weapon. It looked like a decision. The shuttle bay was large enough for our transport with room for several more vessels, and a human crew member in a dark uniform met us at the airlock. Young humans look young to me, their smooth faces and the way they carry something in their expressions that older species tend to lose, something that might be called persistent hopefulness, and professional. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Commander Hesse. He extended his hand in the human physical greeting gesture, which I had read about but not personally experienced. I offered my secondary limb, which is the closest analog I have, and he shook it with a brief, firm grip and moved on without making an issue of the moment. I appreciated that. The interior of the Dominion was not what I expected. Galactic warships generally fall into two aesthetic categories. The Drakthul build their interiors the way they build their exteriors, purposeful, clean, everything stripped to function, with no concession to any comfort or visual quality that does not serve operational needs. The result is beautiful in its ruthlessness and deeply unsettling to visit. The Vreth Collective build with what they call structural harmony. Everything coordinated, everything flowing, every corridor designed with the same aesthetic framework as every other corridor, which is soothing and slightly disorienting in the way that total coherence always is. The Dominion's corridors were wide, wider than the operational minimum for a warship would require, and the lighting was warm. Not bright, not clinical, warm in the amber to white range. The corridors were lined at intervals with what I eventually identified as mounting brackets for equipment that was not currently mounted. They could be configured rapidly for different operational needs. The color of the interior plating was a medium gray with structural ribs visible at ceiling height, and those ribs were functional, not decorative. They were part of the internal impact distribution framework. But what I noticed most, and what I kept noticing as Lieutenant Commander Hesse led me deeper into the ship toward the briefing section, were the people. The crew of the Dominion moved through those corridors with a specific quality that I have seen in very few places in 31 cycles of galactic observation. It was not the rigid precision of a military crew performing for inspection. It was the easy, confident movement of people who belonged somewhere and knew it. They nodded to each other in passing. They spoke in brief, low exchanges. One crew member, passing us in the corridor, paused to let our group through a junction and nodded to me specifically at me, not past me, with the casual friendliness of someone encountering a visitor at a place they were proud of. These people were not afraid. I had served aboard confluence observation vessels that were far from any danger, with far superior odds, and those crews had a lower resting level of confidence than what I was seeing in these corridors. This ship was sitting 40,000 kilometers from the most feared fleet in the galaxy, and its crew was moving like people who had somewhere to be and were interested in getting there. I do not have good language for what that did to something in my chest. "The captain's in the secondary conference room," Hesse said, turning left at a junction marked with a small direction indicator. "We're using secondary because primary command is on active watch rotation during any unresolved contact situation. Captain keeps that protocol regardless of what he's doing personally. He's meeting with the Dracthal Fleet Commander, while primary command maintains active watch," I said. "Yes, sir." "He's comfortable with that division of attention." Hesse glanced at me. He had an expressive face, humans often do, and what it expressed in that moment was something between amusement and what I might call affectionate pride. "Captain Reeves comfortable with a lot of things," he said. "You'll see." Captain Aldous Reeve was standing at the viewport of the secondary conference room when Lieutenant Commander Hesse opened the door. Not sitting at the conference table, standing, looking out at the Dracthal fleet position, which was visible from this viewport as a cluster of distant lights, not dramatic from here, just points of light in the dark. But they were what they were, and Reeve was looking at them with his hands clasped behind his back and a stillness about him that was, I can only say this, not affected. I have spent 31 cycles observing people manage difficult situations. I know performed calm. I know what it looks like when someone is using stillness to control something beneath it. He turned when we entered, and I saw his face for the first time. He was not what I would call physically imposing by human standards, from the documentation I had reviewed. Medium height for his species. Brown skin, dark hair going gray at the temples, dark eyes behind them that were alert and warm in a combination I have not often encountered in command-level individuals, who tend toward one or the other. He looked like he had been doing something difficult for a long time and had made his peace with the difficulty. "Observer Veth Kalos." He extended his hand and I offered my secondary limb, and he made the same brief, firm gesture Hesse had made without commentary. "Thank you for making the trip. I know you're mid-shift." "I'm glad to be here." "Get you anything, water, something warm?" I declined. He gestured to the table and we both sat, and I noticed that he did not sit at the head position, where the table's configuration suggested the primary occupant was meant to sit. He sat at one of the side positions, leaving the head open. I thought about that for a moment. "The Dracthal transport has departed their fleet position," said a voice through a small communication panel near the viewport. A woman's voice, steady and informational. "Estimated arrival 14 minutes. "Thank you, Commander Walsh," Reeve said. Then to me, "My executive officer, she's on the bridge." "Maintaining active watch." "Maintaining active watch," he confirmed. He looked at me with the directness that I had already noticed was characteristic of humans in their communication, not aggressive, just very present. They look at you. They keep looking at you when they are speaking, in a way that most species modulate more. "What's your read on the situation from the station?" I considered the question, honestly. "Please." "Unprecedented," I said. "The communication exchange this morning was unlike any Dracthal diplomatic interaction in the Confluence record. Vrethdal responded in 23 minutes. He responded on your chosen channel. He's coming to you. None of those things." I paused, choosing words. "None of those things are characteristic Dracthal protocol." "No," Reeve agreed. "And you anticipated this." "I hoped for it," he said, with a precision about the distinction that told me he had thought carefully about the difference. "Anticipated is too strong. I thought it was possible that if we came in a certain way, it would create conditions for something different than the standard dynamic. But possible and anticipated aren't the same thing." "How did you determine the certain way to come in?" He thought about this, not performing thought, actually considering. We spent a long time studying the Dracthul engagement history. Every documented contact, every battle, every negotiation that resulted in a non-combat outcome, every one that resulted in combat. You look for the pattern in the ones that weren't combat, you find something interesting. Which is, every non-combat outcome involved a party that didn't behave like prey, he said simply. Not because they were strong enough to make the Dracthul back down, they weren't mostly, but because they did something that made the Dracthul curious instead of contemptuous. And curious is a different state. Curious means there's something they don't know, and something they don't know means there's information they might want. He paused. The Dracthul are very intelligent. They don't get curious often. When they do, you have something to work with, I finished. Yes. I looked at the viewport, at the distant lights of the most feared fleet in the galaxy. And the ship, the capabilities that don't match our documentation. He smiled at that briefly. Some of our capabilities have been in development for a while. We keep things close until we have a clear need to be open about them, no different from most other species. But you were open about them today, to anyone with a sensor array watching. Correct. That was also deliberate. Everything today is deliberate, he said, without particular emphasis. It was just a statement of fact. Then from the communication panel, Dracthul transport is on final approach, Captain. 3 minutes. Reeve stood, I stood. He straightened his uniform jacket with 2 quick, businesslike movements. Not the elaborate ceremony of preparing for a high-stakes moment. Just a man tidying himself up before meeting someone. One question before they arrive, I said. Sure. Are you afraid? He looked at me with those direct, warm, alert eyes. Then, not performing anything, not constructing an answer for effect. A little, he said. It's a real situation. Fear in real situations is appropriate. It's what you do with it. He said it the way you'd say something that had been true for a long time and had stopped needing to be defended. Then the door opened and the future walked in. End of part 1. Total, approximately 7,800 words. Continued in part 2, The Weight of Iron. Note, this portion of the record contains direct witness account of the bilateral meeting. All dialogue is reconstructed from personal memory and partial audio recording. Accuracy is affirmed to the best of this observer's capability. Vrethdal was larger than I expected. I say this knowing that I had his physical specifications in a file, 3.6 meters in his standard configuration. Mass, 240 kilograms in combat plating. I knew these numbers. I had read them. But the numbers are not the thing. The thing is the room. When Vrethdal came through the conference room door, the room changed. Not the temperature, not the lighting, nothing physical changed. The room changed the way it changes when something enters it that was not designed to be contained by ordinary spaces. He was followed by 2 Dracthul soldiers, both in full combat plating, both moving with that eerie soundlessness, and even the soldiers, who would have been extraordinarily imposing in any other context, were peripheral. Background. Vrethdal looked at the room with those amber eyes, that hot, star-dying amber. And then he looked at Captain Reeve. Captain Reeve looked back. There was a beat. It was not long, 2 seconds, maybe 3, but it was the kind of beat that contains more than the time it takes to pass. Then Reeve said, Commander Vrethdal, thank you for coming. Captain Reeve. Vrethdal's translated voice filled the room without effort. He looked around the space, taking in the table, the viewport, the visible portion of the corridor through the door. He looked at me, a brief, assessing amber glance that I felt more than perceived. Then back to Reeve. Your ship is interesting. I'll pass that along to the people who built it, Reeve said. Please sit. If the configuration doesn't work, he gestured at the chairs, which were human standard and therefore absurd next to Vrethdal's dimensions. Vrethdal looked at the chair for one moment. Then he folded himself into it with an ease that suggested he had sat in furniture below his scale before, and found it no particular insult. His two soldiers positioned themselves, standing at the door. Reeve glanced at them, then at Vrethdal, then nodded once, which I understood to be an acknowledgement that the soldiers could stay. "You have no guards," Vrethdal said. "I don't," Reeve agreed. Vrethdal absorbed this. "You are not concerned." "Commander," Reeve said, in a tone that was genuinely not performative confidence and not dismissiveness, but something I can only call settled, the tone of something that has already been through a process and come out the other side. "If I were the kind of person who needed guards, I would be the wrong person for this meeting." Something moved in Vrethdal's amber eyes. I have limited experience reading Drakthul facial expressions. Their faces are not structured like most species' faces, and the range of visible expression is narrower. But I had been studying what material existed on their physiological cues, and what I saw in those eyes was interest. Genuine, unperformed interest. "You knew my name when you sent the meeting request," Vrethdal said. "You addressed the message to me specifically." "We do our research," Reeve said. "And what does your research tell you about me?" It was not quite a question. It was closer to a test. Reeve leaned back slightly in his chair. He was not trying to physically minimize himself in a space that contained Vrethdal. He was just a man sitting in his own chair in his own conference room. "It tells me you are possibly the most accomplished active military commander in this sector of the galaxy. It tells me that you have been in this neutral zone for 3 weeks, which is longer than required for a standard demonstration of sovereignty intent, which means you have been specifically waiting for a response of a particular kind. It tells me that you responded to my transmission in 23 minutes and agreed to come here, which is not how you typically operate." He paused. "So my research tells me that you're curious about something, and I'm happy to have whatever conversation addresses that." The room was very quiet. "You study us," Vrethdal said. "Thoroughly," Reeve said. "Most species study us. They use what they learn to stay out of our way." "We found different applications," Reeve said. "Another of those beats, the weight of it." "Your mining operation," Vrethdal said, "it did not leave." "No." "The workers were informed of the patrol's presence." "Immediately, yes. The foreman made a judgment call." "A mining foreman made a judgment call," Vrethdal repeated. There was something in the way he said it, not contempt, which is what I would have expected. More like he was examining an artifact from an unfamiliar culture and trying to determine its function. "We have a certain organizational culture," Reeve said carefully. "The people on the ground have significant autonomy in situations their leadership can't immediately advise on." The foreman knew what the Union's position on those coordinates was. He made the decision consistent with that position. He was not afraid. "He was probably quite afraid," Reeve said. "That didn't change the decision." Vrethdal was still for a moment in the way that he'd been still when he entered, the total, architectural stillness of something that is using all of its attention. Then, "Why did you come alone?" "Because bringing more ships would have been the wrong message," Reeve said. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to impress you with numbers. I'm here because we have a situation that needs to be resolved, and the way to resolve it is to talk to the person actually empowered to make decisions. Bringing a fleet says, I'm here to fight or I'm here to make a show of force. Bringing one ship says, I'm here to talk." He paused. "We're capable of other conversations. This is the one I wanted to have." "We are capable of other conversations." Vrethdal let the echo sit there. "You believe your one ship could make a different conversation?" "I believe," Reeve said, with the same precision he'd used with me about hoping versus anticipating, that if we needed to have a different conversation, we'd need more than one ship. But I also believe that sending one ship, and having that ship be what it is, makes clear that the choice to have this conversation is a choice. not a necessity. I watched Vrethdal's eyes during this. I watched them very carefully. What I saw there, I want to be precise about, because I will have to file this account in precision, is what the confluence demands. Vrethdal looked at Captain Reeve with an expression that I had no precedent for in any Dracthal contact documentation in my 31 cycles of professional experience. It was respect. Not acknowledged respect, not performed respect, which is a diplomatic tool and looks different, unguarded respect, the kind that arrives before you decide whether to show it. The meeting lasted 3 hours and 41 minutes. I will not reproduce the full content here. Much of it entered into confidential diplomatic record under the formal bilateral agreement that was drawn up in the final hour of the meeting, with myself as the confluence witness. But I will describe what happened in those 3 hours and 41 minutes, because the record of what happened matters even when the specific content of what was said is protected. In the first hour, Vrethdal asked questions and Reeve answered them. This was unusual. The Dracthal do not typically ask questions in diplomatic settings. They state positions and wait for the other party to respond. The very act of asking questions implies that the other party has information worth obtaining, which implies a certain parity. The Dracthal do not generally extend parity, but Vrethdal asked. He asked about human history, specifically about the conflicts. You have fought extensively among yourselves, he said. For most of our history, yes, Reeve said. This resulted in the development of better ways to fight, Reeve said, and eventually the understanding that better ways to fight needed to be paired with better reasons not to. The two things sort of pulled each other forward. Vrethdal spent a long moment on this. You built this ship, he said, gesturing at the space around them, meaning the Dominion, the whole of it, as a result of fighting each other. We built everything as a result of fighting each other, Reeve said. The medicine, the infrastructure, the communication systems, the drive technology. Every one of those things has war somewhere in its development history. We're not proud of all of it, but we understand what we are. What are you? Vrethdal asked. The meeting could have broken on that question. It was enormous and it was direct, and it had the quality of a test that would be judged by the instinct of the answer rather than its content. I watched Reeve receive it. A species that got to space, he said, after spending a very long time on one rock learning everything there was to learn about how hard things break, and now we're out here. With ships like this one. With ships like this one. Vrethdal looked at the viewport. The Dracthal fleet was out there, invisible from this angle, and the neutral zone dark was the only thing visible through the glass. The Shelani conquered, he said. 40 ships, as I said. They came because they believed numbers were persuasion. Numbers are one kind of persuasion, Reeve said. They failed. I know. You sent one ship. Yes. Vrethdal turned back from the viewport. The one ship is more persuasive than the 40, he said. It was not a compliment. It was an analysis delivered by someone who understood exactly what they were looking at. Only if the conversation is worth having, Reeve said, which I think it is. Tell me why you think so. Reeve looked at him for a moment, not stalling, gathering. Because the Dracthal sovereignty is the most powerful military force in this sector, and humanity is going to be a significant presence in this sector going forward. And I have read enough of your history to know that the Dracthal don't have a long record of prosperous relationships with species they encounter from a position of unchallenged superiority. The pattern goes one direction. He let that sit. And Reeve continued. I have read enough of your history to know that the exceptions, the relationships that went a different direction, were with species that didn't behave like prey. He looked steadily at Vrethdal. So I'm trying something. Vrethdal looked at him for a long time. Then he said something in his native Dracthal language. not the translated channel, his actual language, the resonant and architectural thing that did not come through the translation system. He said it to his two soldiers at the door. The soldiers moved. Both of them stepped outside the door, and the door closed behind them. Vrethdal and Captain Reeves sat in the conference room with only me as witness, and I understood, without being told, that whatever had just happened was the actual meeting. What happened in the remaining hours, I will describe in terms of what I observed rather than specific content. Captain Reeve talked about humanity with the specific, undefended quality of someone who genuinely knows their subject and is not performing their knowledge. He did not idealize humanity. He did not present a curated version. He talked about the long, grinding history of what humans had done to each other and to the other life on their planet, and about the decisions that had eventually resulted in something worth bringing to the stars. He talked about this with the frankness of someone who had made peace with the full picture rather than choosing the flattering parts. Vrethdal listened. The Drakthul do not listen the way most species listen, the small reciprocating cues, the affirmations, the nodding. They are still, and the stillness is total, and you learn eventually that total stillness is their form of deep attention. He was as still as I have ever seen any living being be. At one point, Reeve pulled up a display from the table's built-in system, a star map, the contested sectors, the mining coordinates, the patrol routes, the full geographic picture of what had become a crisis point. He walked Vrethdal through it with the focus of someone who had been thinking about this for a long time and had clear things to say about it. Vrethdal asked clarifying questions 3 times, not challenges, questions. He was working out something, mapping something in his mind, and the questions were the points where he needed more data to complete the picture. When Reeve finished the geographic walkthrough, he said, "We have no interest in territorial conflict. The Union's position is that the mining coordinates in question fall within our established operating zone. I am willing to put that position on the table formally and work through any legitimate documentation that suggests otherwise. What I am not willing to do is have our people leave a legitimate operation because a patrol indicated displeasure." He said it without aggression, without apology. The distinction between those things, aggression and apology, is one that I think many species struggle to navigate when talking to the Drakthul. Both choices are wrong. Aggression reads as threat, and threat triggers the Drakthul's operational response, which is to destroy the threat. Apology reads as weakness, and weakness triggers a different operational response, which is to extract maximum advantage from the weak party until no further advantage is available. What Reeve did was neither. He stated a position, as a fact about where he stood, with implicit acknowledgement that Vrethdal had his own fact about where he stood, and that the space between the two facts was where the conversation needed to operate. I have never seen this navigated so cleanly.